we can just start up. I appreciate everybody joining. Thank you very much. Of course, this is the Secure and Resilient panel, and we have some new members, which we're going to give an opportunity for them to say hello in just a minute. I'm actually joining you, Delegate Hope. I'm in Arlington. I'm at the George Mason University campus. I'm here for some meetings with George Mason. I'm going to meet with them about a potential opioid jail program. You know, we've had a spike in opioid deaths. Isolation during COVID has been a challenge, and opioid abuse reflects that. And then we later on, well, at 2 o'clock, we'll be joining the governor. He is having a bill signing up here in Falls Church to sign some legislation. And then this afternoon,
Secretary Moran, we lost your audio.
give me a signal if you can hear me again. Hey, Aaron. Oh, that's Curtis. Well, just saying, because of the events of January 6th, there's been an increased focus on those relationships, state, local, federal. We had a very good meeting yesterday with Department of Homeland Security to talk about the coordination of January 6th. Certainly, Virginia stepped up, both the local law enforcement and, of course, our Virginia State Police were very visible defending the Capitol on that afternoon. So those discussions, we'll continue to have those discussions this afternoon with our DC counterpart. So with all that, hopefully we'll have a great meeting this morning. Senator Evan hopefully has been able to join us. But the first, why don't we do some administrative matters and adopt the meeting minutes. Sean has the meeting minutes from October. We last met in October virtually, of course, during the COVID pandemic, and have those minutes been distributed so I can entertain a motion to adopt the minutes?
So moved, Mr. Secretary.
Oh, Delegate Aird, nice to see you. Well, I actually don't see you yet, but nice to hear you.
Here.
Very good. Well, thank you. All right, I hear a motion to adopt the minutes. Do I hear a second?
Second.
All right, haven't heard a second. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Opposed. So next order of business, why don't we go to the new members? I'm just scrolling through the names. So in no particular order other than what I see on my screen, I see Carl Colder. Carl, welcome back. You were an instrumental member of our opioid commission. You were with the department, with the Drug Enforcement Agency at that time. And so I really appreciate your willingness to continue to serve in this capacity. And why don't you say a couple of words and introduce yourself?
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me? Well, hopefully you can. I'm Carl Colder, and I'm really delighted to have been nominated to serve on this committee. I truly believe that, you know, this is something that's going to help the Commonwealth, help the citizens of the Commonwealth, and because of that, you know, this is what I'm going to hopefully enjoy. And so I see some familiar faces. I see the Colonel here with the Virginia State Police. We work together, and of course, just working on the opioid task force. One of the things that, you know, we really said, hey, we need a DEA to be a part of that, and I was glad that we could join in that effort. So I just want to say hello and thank you for the nomination.
Thank you, Carl. We were really pleased when you expressed your interest in serving. You'll bring a lot of interesting knowledge, relevant information to the table. So thank you. And you were very helpful when we wanted to continue and extend the drug take-back effort in Virginia. So thanks again for that. The next new member, I believe, is Paula Loomis. Paula, welcome aboard. If you'd share with us a little bit about yourself. Thank you as well for being willing to serve on the panel.
Yes, well, thank you for allowing me to serve on the panel. I look forward to it. I am an architect from Norfolk, Virginia. I have about 37 years experience in the architectural field, worked for many federal agencies, was active duty with the Air Force, and retired from the Air Force after 30 years of service. I also have worked with the Army Corps, the Navy, the Coast Guard, and the General Services Administration, as well as private practice. One of my specialties is the safety assessment program, where architects volunteer to help communities in natural disasters and doing evaluations of buildings to help get people back in their homes and businesses safely. So that's sort of my connection to this position. And I have been looking forward to this and look forward to this first meeting and future meetings. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. That'll be very helpful for our deliberations, your knowledge and professional background. I believe the next up would be Walter English. Walter, we know you from VEMA, the Virginia Emergency Management Association. Thank you for being willing to serve as well, and nice to see you again. And if you'd just introduce yourself to the rest of the panel.
All right, good morning, everybody. My name is Walter English. I'm currently the emergency coordinator in the city of Fairfax, Virginia. So right around the corner from Arlington, where you're at today at the other George Mason campus. I've worked with the city of Fairfax for right about 19 years. I started out on the fire department and moved up to lieutenant and then came over to emergency management. And I've been in public safety for right around 24 years. And I'm just happy to be here and very glad to contribute. And thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Walter. Thank you for being willing to serve. Any new, and not sure any of the legislators are new to the panel or not. And if I have the list, but I'm not sure if you've been on the panel previously, and if not, I'd welcome you at this time to, I believe Delegate Hope has been on before, but anyone else that might be new to the panel, I'd welcome an opportunity, oh, good. Delegate Eben has joined. Senator Eben?
Yes, Senator Eben now.
Senator, nice to see you. How are you?
Good to see you, sir. I am not new to the panel. I was here at last fall's meeting, but I did just want to let you know for the record that Senator Reeves is participating via audio. He was not able to get in. I had a difficulty getting in as well, but Senator Reeves wanted to be recorded as being present.
Thank you. Senator Reeves, can you hear us? I don't know.
He's listening. He acknowledged that he just got mentioned. So
oh, good.
I don't know if his audio is working yet, but he is listening.
I see his name up there now. Any other delegates or senators welcome your say hello? I know Delegate Aird and Delegate Hope are on.
Mr. Secretary, it's good to be back. Good to see you. This is Jeremy McPike.
Senator, yes. Senator McPike, nice to see you. I see Delegate Ayala as well. That's on the line.
Good morning, Secretary.
Thank you. I know you're busy, so thanks for joining us.
I'm here for these meetings. Y'all do a wonderful job.
Mr. Secretary, it's Reeves. I'm on now. Hopefully you have comms.
You do. Thank you. I can hear you well.
Mr. Secretary.
Yep.
This is retired Senator McWaters. I'm on as well.
Former senator from Virginia Beach. Nice to see you. And I'm sure you're glad to know that your balloon bill finally got passed. It's finally law of Virginia now. So
I'm glad we
your
got some cooperation on that. That's awesome. Thank you very much.
your legacy continues.
Well, I still get a lot of credit for the corkage bill. That no one can beat that one.
All right. All right, so we have, and Erin Sutton actually is, I think, new to this panel, not new to you all. She's been doing a phenomenal job as our chief deputy over at VDEM, working with Curtis Brown, and she's from Virginia Beach, but I think she's joined this panel since. No, I might be. Erin, is that not correct? Aren't you fairly new to this panel?
Yes, fairly new to the panel. I think I caught the tail end of the October one since I started then. So thank you.
Well, you've been doing a great job, and of course, Director Brown, great job. We had a wonderful press event with the governor signing legislation that this panel is aware of with respect to ensuring equity component in response to any disasters, man-made or natural, and certainly that has been reflective of our efforts around the Health Equity Work Group in responding to the COVID crisis and pandemic. So. Director Brown's been doing a great job with that, working closely with DEI, Dr. Janice Underwood with the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Office. So with all that being said, Sean.
This is Senator Barker. I'm on too.
Oh, hey, George.
Hey.
Welcome. Thank you for joining us. And I'll turn it over to Sean we've adopted the minutes, Sean. And first up, I think we're going to hear from VDEM. I see Secretary Carey. I'll like to recognize my counterpart who's been doing a phenomenal job as well, responding to the COVID crisis. So Secretary Carey, any words of wisdom to kick us off?
Well, thank you so much. It really has been, if there, a crisis such as the pandemic here in Virginia and across the country, it's hard to find silver linings, but working so closely with you, Secretary Moran, your team, it's really been a pleasure, and with VDEM together with DDH. So there is some great teamwork. And the only comment I will say is that when I think about the concept of security and resilience, I think of visits I've made to localities and seen their response with putting together community vaccination sites. You can really tell when public safety, the locality, local health department, institutions like a health system and or a university come together, there's nothing that our communities can't do with the proper support. So this has definitely broadened my view of what security and resilience really means, and happy to be a part of the program today. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And with that, Director Brown, are you up and ready? I see you're we're kicking it off with one of the more exciting topics. We do have a very lengthy agenda and a lot of interesting subjects, but this one is important, and I'll hand it over to Curtis Brown to walk us through it.
Yes,
Curtis.
Thanks, Secretary Moran, and good morning to all the members of the panel, members of the Senate and the House, and all the leaders, new members of the panel. Good morning. My name is Curtis Brown, State Coordinator of Emergency Management. Glad to be with you today and discuss all the great work that the staff of the Virginia Department of Emergency Management, all of the state agency staff within the Virginia Emergency Management has been doing over the last year. Since we met in October last, there's been a lot more that has been going on, of course, with our vaccination effort now. And so I know Dr. Jabari will talk about that as it relates to the ongoing work of the VEST as it relates to responding to COVID-19. This first presentation is a component of the resilience panel consistent with code to report out on our adherence to federal law related to adhering to reporting for our ability to respond to hazardous material incidents. And so I'm gonna pass it over to Sean. Can you go to the next slide, please? I want to see if I'm gonna pass it over to Ed Pointer. Okay, yes, I'm gonna pass it over to Ed Pointer, our Director of Response Programs, to give the brief out on this portion of the presentation. Ed, are you on? Or it could be or Johnny.
Hey, Curtis, this is John. I think Ed's having some technical difficulties.
Okay. Can we proceed to my presentation, Sean?
Curtis, we have you later in the agenda, so if we want to come back to the federal Title III, how about we continue the agenda and then come back? How about that?
Yeah, we could do that. Thank you.
All right, sounds great. Awesome. All right, well, ladies and gentlemen, it's great to be back with you. Again, Sean Talmadge, I'm the new Deputy Secretary of Public Safety and Homeland Security. It's great to be back. We have several updates within the Homeland Security realm, and being cognizant of the time, I'm going to jump right in. And please raise your hand if you have any questions, and I'll definitely stop and address those. But my purpose today here is to provide an update on some of the emerging issues within the Homeland Security field and what we're kind of working on. And number one is our cybersecurity, and this is what really keeps me up at night. We struggle with cybersecurity just like any other state in the United States, and in terms of coordinating response, how do we leverage that whole of government approach to deal with either a locality that's having a catastrophic cyber event, or even members of critical infrastructure, private sector that provides lifelines to the community. For example, the power and energy utilities. So here's a couple updates on cybersecurity. We continue our support to the Department of Elections, and we participate in their continuity of operation planning and response and recovery efforts. So happy to report, the November election proceeded without any concerns or issues, and that's just a great example of the collaboration between interagency partners at the local, state, and federal level. I'm also happy to report, and Chris Cruz, if you can turn your camera on, we were finally able to backfill a vacancy within our office. The cybersecurity program manager is really responsible for coordinating across the secretariats and with the interagency partners to better prepare the Commonwealth for a cyber event. So the good news is I've already filled up his plate with a number of priorities. You can see there in upcoming work. We do have a cyber response plan, but it's not well known, it's not well exercised, and there's a number of friction points that we've discovered in that plan. So the first thing we're going to work on is conducting an after-action review of that statewide plan to ensure that is most effective. The second thing, I referenced our private sector critical infrastructure owners. For example, the Dominions, the electric co-ops out west. They are vulnerable to coordinated attacks, both physical and cyber. So we want to engage in a very deliberate process to determine how best we can support them. Virginia has a well-known and developed process to support localities during emergency. For example, the COVID response or a hurricane. But do we have the right processes and the touch points and the procedures to support an entity like a co-op or Dominion when they come under a cyber attack that produces impacts to the general public? And I would argue that we don't. We're not there yet. And so we need to, we're going to engage through a workshop series, likely in the fall, and we'll definitely keep this panel aware of that. And then the last thing for the panel members, I know at our last meeting, I did report that we plan on convening the cybersecurity sub-panel. bottom line is due to operations and tempo, we just didn't have the capacity to convene that meeting. But with with Chris Cruz online with us, we'll be able to convene that group, and the panel will get an invitation. So those that are those panel members interested in participating in that important group, please do join. Next, in terms of communications interoperability, I'm happy to report that the Virginia State Police has implemented a contract to expand our Commonwealth program. The vendor is SciTech out of the Virginia Beach area. The funding is in place. The project is proceeding. Over 20 installations across the Commonwealth have already occurred. It's probably greater than that by now. And again, it's going to take about 18 months to get all localities fielded the brand new equipment. That also comes with training and all the sustained maintenance for that program. And again, that's designed to connect all local radio systems and provide an interoperability solution to connect them to the STARS, which is the statewide radio network that is used by state agencies. And again, it's not isolated just to that application. They can use it to share data. They can use it at the local level to connect disparate radio systems for large events. And we're really happy with the progress and the ownership that the state police has taken to develop that project. And again, that is a service provided to the localities at no cost. Next, FirstNet, they've been a great partner. We've deployed them several times to a number of no notice and also known events. For example, some of the events in downtown Richmond. And we really appreciate that partnership. We're seeing a lot of great use of FirstNet, and they continue to expand their network here in Virginia. And also along the lines of new staffing is as you're aware, Tom Krabs has moved on to another position in the administration. And we have backfilled his position with a very well-known 911 telecommunicator, a deputy director from the Central Virginia area, Gabe Elias, and he's on the line. I'd like to introduce him as our new interoperability program manager. Again, he's going to pick up running with several projects. Number one is helping to expand the awareness and ensuring that stakeholders are buying into the Commonwealth program. We got to make that a reality. And then the second thing is our SCIP, or Statewide Communications Interoperability Plan. That is in final draft, and it's going to be somewhat unique because it's going to incorporate some of the next gen 911 strategies into that plan, but also incorporating Comlink as our interoperability solution. So we're really excited about that. And I believe this is my last slide, so I'll be wrapping up. But again, we continue to consider emerging technology, both from a threat basis and also as an opportunity. So again, under the Department of Aviation, we help to establish this Flight Information Exchange, the VA FIX, which provides an opportunity to communicate with UAS pilots, areas where public safety operations are ongoing. But we're also seeing that as a means to help us with a project that we plan on taking on in the fall. And that is really establishing an airspace management plan so we can fly manned and unmanned aircraft in the same general location during large scale search and rescue or catastrophic events. And again, the reason why we would do that is to improve our efficiency and effectiveness. And these are some lessons learned from the Hurricane Harvey event in Texas. So that would be a very deliberate planning process. The next is with our relationship with the Center for Innovative Technology and their Center for Unmanned Systems there. We recently announced the Public Safety Innovation Center. This is a new idea that, again, we want to find a place where we can test and develop recommended policies, procedures for emerging technology. And again, this is a brand new effort by CIT, and we look forward to that partnership. Again, there's so many convergence of technology right now. We got unmanned systems, we got maritime unmanned systems, and artificial intelligence, and other technologies that could make us smarter, work faster, and help us, save lives in the end. So this center will provide basically an experimentation field where we can conduct these exercises to understand the technology better to ensure that they're used in the most appropriate way. And then the last thing I'll highlight, and again, this is open for panel members as well, if you're interested in attending. We've done great work in leveraging unmanned aerial systems for public safety use. But I'm really pushing Hampton Roads to take a look at maritime unmanned systems. There are a number of industry members right here in Virginia, but just like we can fly an unmanned system for a car crash on Interstate 95, let's say in Northern Virginia, and it cuts the time to document that car crash scene to a fraction. We're talking less than a quarter amount of the time to document a scene. We can do the same thing for the Hampton Roads region. For example, it's about $250 million a day in impact when the channel is closed and the Port of Virginia is closed due to, let's say it's a hurricane that's blowing through. Following that hurricane, the port will remain closed until the Coast Guard determines that the channels are clear down to 55 feet. Well, right now we're using manned boats, and it takes dozens of agencies to conduct this scan to make sure that the waterways are clear and ready for safe passage. My vision is, why don't we launch some unmanned submersibles that scans that channel more quickly, and again, we can open our channel in less than a day versus a couple days. So again, that'll be a workshop in the first week of June down in Hampton Roads, and if you're interested, please reach out, and I'll definitely get you an invitation. With that said, Penny, your questions, Mr. Chairman. That concludes my report.
Hey, Sean.
Thanks, Sean. Why don't we open it up for opportunity for questions?
Mr. Secretary.
Hey, Charles, welcome. You might want to you're going to say something about our unmanned systems?
Well, I just wanted to say thanks to Sean, to you, Secretary Moran, to the governor, and to the legislators that are on here today for supporting first Comlink. Comlink really sets Virginia ahead in being first in the country, and we've been there for a long time. So that was very important. I wanted to thank you for that. And then the same thing with the unmanned aircraft systems. The support that you all have given throughout have put Virginia to where we have now more than 70 public safety agencies with unmanned aircraft system programs, and we're going to be doing a lot more. So just thank you all for that.
Well, mutually, we know you have been a champion on this issue, so look forward to continuing our work together on those issues. Any other questions of Sean, of Secretary Talbot?
Mr. Secretary, when he quoted the amount for when the shipping lanes are blocked per day, the loss per day economic, what was that number again, please?
From our current understanding, that's $250 million per day of impact.
Wow. Okay. Thank you very much.
I don't. All right, Sean. Next up on the agenda. Hey, Lieutenant White from the Virginia State Police. He does a great job. You know, he tours the Commonwealth, providing lectures to local law enforcement and working with our federal partners to update public safety officials on threat environment, and he does a great job. So if you ever have an opportunity to see him do that, I'd encourage you to do so. So without further ado, Lieutenant White.
Mr. Secretary, thank you so much. I truly appreciate that introduction. Members of the panel, Colonel Settle, and our state legislators, I'm truly honored to be able to speak with you today. What I'd like to present on behalf of the Virginia State Police and the Criminal Intelligence Division is our threat assessment briefing that we have compiled for this year, and looking at the threats that are affecting the Commonwealth as we see it in conjunction with our partners. But next slide, please. So this is not just a Fusion Center only document. We've both us and the Northern Virginia Regional Intelligence Center in Fairfax County have identified potential threats using our standard information needs. These are the questions that we are looking to fill those intelligence gaps for issues throughout the Commonwealth, both of a terrorist and criminal nature. We've discussed with our partners, looked at finished intelligence products from our federal partners such as FBI and DHS, and compiled all that in to be able to give an executive overview of that. Next slide, please. So just as a point of reference, as we look at the Commonwealth and the very large geographic area that we take up, the Virginia Fusion Center is the primary fusion center for the state. We are recognized by DHS as that. However, we could not be as effective as we are without our partnership with the Northern Virginia Regional Intelligence Center, headed up by Fairfax County, but with a large state police presence there. The NIVRIC, again, having an acronym, being an intelligence agency, the NIVRIC is a recognized center, recognized by DHS. The National Network of Fusion Centers totals 80 different centers across the nation, every state having at least one, and again, like here in the Commonwealth, we have 2. Next slide. So as we're looking at the threat issues, we looked at it through different things such as impact and mitigation efforts. So impact is defined as physical damage, economic loss, and injury or harm to community interests or public safety. And then mitigation is what we have looked at in past operational efforts and overall understanding of the event. So as we look at these threats, we have broken them down into 5 different threat bands. Threat band number 1 being the most hazardous to the Commonwealth, and then threat 5, while the least within that range, still poses an effect to all of us. Next slide. For 2021, these are our top threat priorities within what we call threat band 1, and we will go into more detail on these, but I'm going to hit these and then explain the other threat bands as well. So our top threat priorities, and the key 2 right there, the very top 2 are independent lone actors and then cyber threats. And when we look at what Deputy Secretary Talmadge had already talked about with cyber issues and what we're looking at for elections, other critical infrastructure, I think we all understand that issue. Independent lone actors, due to the fact that it's very hard to have leakage as far as what their motivations or what their targets are, makes it difficult for us in law enforcement and intelligence to be able to be proactive in trying to end that individual's efforts along the pathway to violence, because we don't necessarily know what that person's targets are. Our next most significant issues, though, are domestic violent extremists, drug trafficking organizations, and gangs. As I mentioned, we have 5 different threat bands. I've already mentioned the top 2. Threat band 3, we're looking at anarchist extremists, environmental extremists, and militia extremists. And then we're also looking at street gangs, outlaw motorcycle gangs, that sort of thing. Threat band 4, we're looking at sovereign citizens, extremists, foreign terrorist organizations such as ISIS or Al Qaeda. And then our threat band 5 are foreign terrorist organizations, specifically the group known as Hezbollah. Thank you. Next slide. So when we look at the technique of being able to do the analysis on this, we've based each group's impact to Virginia and the mitigation efforts, and those threat groups are classified as you see here, but we're looking at 5 different things. We're looking at controversial, political, and judicial actions that could instill some sort of actionable move upon a person when they're upset about specific political policy, or, as we've seen over the past couple of years, different judicial decisions. We're looking at the level of political and social unrest in specific communities or in the nation as a whole. The level of socioeconomic stress in society. We have seen that ebb and flow over the years, but of course, as there are more economic pressures on individuals, they are more likely to be susceptible to doing some sort of act of violence. We're looking at law enforcement capabilities, resources, and most importantly is relations, and being able to relate with the communities that we serve. and making sure that those relations and those avenues of communication are clear so that can dissuade the misunderstandings of the motivations and goals of both the private sector and the public sector and what we're trying to achieve. And then the last thing would be wild cards and external influences. And again, those are kind of the difficult things because you don't necessarily know what could be that trigger point to have somebody go down that pathway of violence. Next slide. Again, we're looking at our most two highest threats. The first one would be independent lone actors. Independent lone actors will almost certainly be challenging for law enforcement to mitigate and detect potential acts, again, because there's a very small amount of leakage as far as what these people are planning on doing. Threat investigations for potential independent lone actors will likely increase because of personal and ideological grievances. Again, it's those trigger points that will set somebody on that path. And independent lone actors' violent intentions are often difficult to predict or require behavioral threat assessment teams to assess whether actions or intent is triggered by environmental or mental illness factors. As we continue with the presentation, I will talk about the Virginia Fusion Center and Virginia State Police's efforts within the behavioral threat analysis field to show that we are being very proactive and trying to stop that pathway of violence. Next slide, please. So when we look at behavioral threat management, as you can see there, it's a systematic method of investigation and examination. We're taking a whole community viewpoint of this. This is not something where law enforcement is looking at something with the intent of making an arrest. This is something that we can look to determine if somebody simply needs mental health services, that we can facilitate that care with our partners, whether it's a local social services board, mental health board, or private physicians, to be able to guide that person, whether they had been receiving mental health care before or they are in need of those services now. An example would be is a case that we've been working over the past few days, where a subject has made some very disturbing, though not illegal, comments via social media. And where along that path, if somebody makes those comments and they get to a point where they do a violent act, we want to be able to stop that before it gets there. So we're working with public health individuals within that local community to be able to see where this individual had gotten help previously, and we're trying to get them back in to be able to get those services. So I think it's important that everybody understand that's not a law enforcement action. That behavioral threat is truly a whole community helping individuals to be able to get the services that they need. Next slide, please. So the second top threat that we had discussed are cyber threats. Foreign adversaries and threat actors will likely conduct foreign influence operations, disinformation campaigns, and malicious attacks against infrastructure and government networks throughout the Commonwealth. Local and state governments will almost certainly be targeted for criminal exploitation for out-of-date security, misconfigured or vulnerable systems, as well as supply chain vulnerabilities. So what we look at is when these threats come in to our cyber intelligence team here at the Virginia Fusion Center, we want to make sure that we are looking at what our localities and our partners are seeing, but we also want to give them information on the methods of attack, how they are constantly changing and evolving, that the targets are wide and varied, and prevention truly requires on cybersecurity awareness on citizens and organizations to be able to make sure that they do something as simple as keeping their passwords safe, but also to make sure that they do more complicated issues as keeping systems safe. Next slide, please. Domestic violent extremists. Throughout 2020, Virginia law enforcement agencies provided public and participant security at numerous lawful protests held to bring attention to perceived social and political injustices. And the Secretary mentioned that in his opening remarks this morning. Many of these demonstrations, however, devolved into unlawful assemblies or riots by criminal actors inciting violence and engaging in suspicious activities. Subsequent criminal investigations linked some of these participants in these crimes to racially motivated extremism, anarchist extremism, or environmental extremism ideologies. Similar social and political drivers in this year, 2021, will continue to encourage these threat actors to engage in criminal acts to promote those ideologies, likely using violence and targeting of law enforcement personnel. And those cases are continually to be investigated to look at those threats as they affect all of us in public safety. Next slide, please. When we continue to look at other groups, key things to think about here, and these slides kind of deal specifically with environmental extremism. Known criminal actors affiliated with the Yellowfinch Camp. And for those of you all that are not familiar with the Yellowfinch Camp, this was a tree sit location set up to protest the Mountain Valley Pipeline that is coming through Southwest Virginia, through Giles and Montgomery County down to the North Carolina border. Known criminal actors did infiltrate that camp. And while that camp has been cleared, we know that individuals will continue to engage in violent criminal acts against law enforcement and promote an anarchist extremist ideology. And we are seeing numerous instances of anarchist extremists infiltrating these other known groups. Next slide, please. When we think about drug trafficking organizations, DTOs will almost certainly traffic fentanyl and its derivatives throughout the Commonwealth, increasing fatal and non-fatal overdoses and first responder risk of exposure. Illicit narcotics will almost certainly be trafficked into Virginia via traditional concealment methods on our major interstate corridors, which we have been dealing with for years. And then we also see that temporary U.S. border restrictions due to COVID-19 mitigation will likely continue to impact the supply and cost of illicit narcotics as non-essential travel is limited. And as the restrictions come off, we will see different patterns of transport, and that is something that we continue to investigate. Next slide, please. Street gangs and outlaw motorcycle gang members were routinely investigated in Virginia for their role in illicit narcotics distribution in the year 2020. These ongoing crimes, coupled with their organization's overriding goal to pursue membership and territorial expansion, makes these criminal organizations significant threats to the Commonwealth. Increased membership for MS-13 affiliates is of heightened concern in Northern Virginia, Richmond, and the Hampton Roads regions because of their willingness and documented use of extreme violence to achieve the objectives of those gangs. Next slide, please. So one thing that, again, for the Secure Commonwealth panel, you understand this, but the safety of Virginia residents and public safety personnel are absolutely our priority for the Virginia Fusion Center and the Northern Virginia Regional Intelligence Center. We continuously provide support to our partners and proactively and reactively. When we are looking at known events that are coming up, or we have a spontaneous event or incident that occurs, we are providing information and intelligence to our partners, to our leaders, so they can make informed, timely decisions to be able to best deploy their assets and make better strategic decisions. Next slide, please. To that end, then, a big part of making those informed decisions also goes to the public. And Secretary Moran was very kind in what he had mentioned about our outreach efforts through the Virginia Fusion Center. Our newest program is called VFC Shield. After the 9/11 attacks, the New York Police Department knew that they had to have an avenue of communication with the private sector, restaurateurs, hotel owners, and they came up with the SHIELD program. And what this is an open source, completely shareable information platform to be able to provide information not only to members of the public, but also to other decision makers so they can see information from a different context and again, make that informed decision. So we started this program as an outgrowth of our Fusion Liaison program, which was geared to government entities, law enforcement, public safety, emergency management, but we wanted to have something for the public. So this program is completely free. All the documents that we provide are encouraged to be reshared. We have 10 different sectors looking at education, critical infrastructure, public safety, houses of worship, all detailed information, multiple products going out every month. Again, totally free, able to be shared. And within the year that we've been operational, even though we started this right at the very end of 2019, we have nearly 1,000 citizens that have signed up for this program. I humbly ask that as you get an opportunity, please take a look at that link. You can access that through the Virginia State Police website and dive down through the Virginia Fusion Center website. But we think this is a really good avenue of communication to be able to help our citizens, and we look forward to continuing those efforts and looking for other ways of improvement. Mr. Secretary, that's all I have, and I'd be more than happy to take any questions now or at the end if you'd like.
Yeah, Lieutenant, that was a lot of material, and I'll just kick it off and say, Virginia Fusion Center has been instrumental in our preparedness for any variety of events that have occurred, at least during my, almost 8 years in this position. Certainly Charlottesville, but also the legislators well know during Lobby Day 2020, and then again Lobby Day 2021. So with that being said, there are a couple of events, pending events that will necessitate your work, and if you could comment on them, please. Charlottesville has now sought and received the approval to take down the Robert E. Lee Monument. That contributed at least to the 2017 event. And then also here in the city of Richmond, we anticipate and hope for a favorable decision from the Virginia Supreme Court on the Robert E. Lee Monument in the city of Richmond. So if you could just comment what the Fusion Center will be doing with respect to those events, and what, if anything, will be shared. Any thought, if you have any thoughts about those events.
Yes, sir, Mr. Secretary. So as we looked at previous events, our operations have been where we have looked at pre-event occurrences and developing information intelligence to provide to those leaders, maintaining a situational awareness during those events, and then trying to look at best practices and better ways to mitigate incidents for the next. So as we look at these previous events, we've seen some performance gaps, both as far as intelligence coming in and then also information dissemination. So what we will do is during these major events is we actually have situational awareness rooms. The Homeland Security Information Network allows for a Adobe Connect session where we can actually have real-time information from law enforcement officers that are in the field, giving us on-site intelligence coming in that we are able to collate and give that to law enforcement leadership, other public safety leadership, people that are in that room. Therefore, all that information then goes, of course, to the Secretary's office, and they're able to give that information out to their distribution list or to their concerned consumers of information. So we're already looking at these issues. We've been in contact with our partner agencies, whether it's local law enforcement, DHS, our federal partners, looking at specific actors that may play a part in these events. Again, and as I mentioned in my brief, in a lot of instances, we are seeing anarchist extremists co-opt a specific event merely to cause anarchy. And so looking at those things, those are the things that are really hard to predict, but we're trying to look through investigative techniques to be able to get the information to see if that's going to be one of those target locations.
Thank you. All right, open it up for other questions of Lieutenant White.
I got a question, Delegate Hope.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Lieutenant White. I appreciate your presentation. In your presentation, you mentioned militias, and I'm wondering if you can expand on that a little bit. And in particular, what I'm thinking of is if there's any confusion amongst law enforcement in other localities about the Virginia Code, just articulating what the authority militias have versus law enforcement or the National Guard. Can you comment on that or expand anything more about what you're seeing?
I would say, generally speaking, there's been a lot of educational material put out to different law enforcement agencies through our partner agencies such as Department of Criminal Justice Services, as well as each individual agency giving information out to patrol officers. The whole point about militias and any of these groups, and you really have to be diligent in doing this, and I may have misspoken earlier, but is adding the word extremists. So militia extremists. So being a militia, having a group of people open carrying of firearms in a legal manner, there's nothing illegal about that, and many people simply do that to exercise the rights that they have under the Constitution. It's when the extremists happens, when you're violating law or you're making inflammatory statements either in social media or in person that are inciting those acts of violence. So we completely understand the open carry. We're legally able to do so, such as, of course, can on Capitol Square, courthouses, that sort of thing. But it's a matter of looking at that. And a big component of making sure that we can mitigate those issues ahead of time is what I'd mentioned about having those open lines of communication, is being able to work with those groups, understanding what their plans are, and they understand what we have to do. So when we did the lead up into the Lobby Day events that we've had the past 2 years, where we've had a significant Second Amendment rights presentation with some militia groups and some militia extremists, we have worked with many of those groups where we have had open dialogue and been able to meet with their leaders. And because of what we've been able to have a discussion with our law enforcement partners and explain to these private groups the situation that they are going to be putting themselves into and the nature of the threat from these extremist groups, there's actually been a decrease in the activity in some of these groups that they ended up not participating or participating in a smaller group simply so they did not get caught up in those illegal acts. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'm more focused on the code and whether the code is clear or not. I see different stories about localities granting militias the rights that we would ordinarily give to state police and local law enforcement. And I'm wondering if that's on our end, that the code isn't clear, that those just authorities aren't granted. And maybe it is a difference of opinion.
I'm afraid I might have to punt on that question and send that up the chain of command for that one.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Hey, Austin, Carl Colder here.
Yes, sir.
Have two questions here on the behavior threat assessment. Is that are we seeing that substance use is playing a part in that, as well as the mental health? That's my first question. And the second question is on the gang activity, and that being, what are we really seeing now? Is it the human trafficking, narcotics, or extortion, or all of them with that?
Sir, you actually made my answer very easy because you answered the question and said exactly what I was going to say, so I appreciate that. In regards to the behavioral threat, we do see quite a few events that happen where, just anecdotally, somebody gets drunk, they're mad, and they send to social media or they send a letter or make a phone call, and because they're upset at the time. And then when we go out and ask, hey, did you send this and why did you do it? Well, I was very upset, I'd been drinking, and it goes from there. So yes, substance abuse is an issue. I will not say that is the major issue. I would say that mental health is the major issue in this. And when we look at many of these threats or events that we end up investigating, that the individuals have been previous consumers of mental health care and mental health services. So it's a matter of trying to steer them back to get to those services again. We've been pretty successful with that too. Our behavioral threat team has been working on ad hoc basis for about 2.5 years, but a significant unit here in the Fusion Center for the past year, with 2 agents, an analyst full-time, and 2 other analysts on a part-time basis, working with other groups, and we're able to intake more information, and I think we're able to provide a better service because we're guiding those people to where they need to go. There have been some criminal prosecutions on that, but they're very small, and that's not what our unit's trying to do. In regards to the gangs, you're exactly right. The things you talked about, narco transport and human trafficking, both of them are absolutely critical issues. Traditionally in Virginia, the Bloods have been the largest criminal street gang. They've been eclipsed by MS-13. So when we see that group doing their expansion throughout the Commonwealth, I mentioned the three critical areas of Northern Virginia, Richmond, and Hampton Roads. But we are seeing them in other parts of the state too. They are taking those activities, the narco transport, the human trafficking, and we're seeing those in other areas too. It has not gotten to that critical level that we've seen in the major metropolitan areas, but we will assess, and I think it just makes common sense that we'll see those activities grow in the other areas as well.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Other questions? All right. Hearing none. Sean, next up. Oh, good. Keenan Moore from the State Police, Major Keenan Hook. Keenan, you might, for those legislators, you might know Keenan from, he does a lot of work with us during the legislative session. He's a William and Mary law grad. So we're all very proud of Keenan, and I'm glad he's over at the State Police. He assists us with any number of pieces of legislation, particularly over the last year and a half. And so if you don't know Keenan, get to know him. He's a great resource and asset to us all. And we've enjoyed some really good numbers of late. And let's see what they say today. Keenan.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary and members of the panel. I appreciate the opportunity to present today and talk to you about crime trends, in particular violent crime and hate crime. There's been a lot of discussion nationally about those two issues during a rather tumultuous 2020. So the data I'm going to talk to you about comes from our incident-based reporting system in Virginia, mandated by statute. Every law enforcement agency reports to the Virginia State Police any criminal incident that they take a police report on. They capture data concerning that incident. So the event itself, suspect demographic, victim demographic, all sorts of things to characterize those incidents. We turn around, take that data and report it annually in a Crime in Virginia report that comes out right at the beginning of June each year. And we also turn that data over to the FBI so that they can look at the entire nation, and they publish crime in the United States in the fall of each year. So the data I have for you today, again, coming from law enforcement, is preliminary 2020 data. So this is data that will be released in full in June. We're ahead of the curve with regards to the national data, so we have to sort of tease out where we are in line with the rest of the nation here. Next slide, please. So in particular with violent crime, I think I'm sure many of you have heard, all of you have heard discussions in the news media about violent crime trends this year, particularly many of the major cities. We've seen a considerable increase in violent crime across the nation. I'm happy to report that violent crime has not seen that trend in Virginia, as I'll get into in just a second. But to define violent crime, we're talking about murder, non-negligent manslaughter, rape, robbery, and aggravated assault. And that definition is the FBI's definition, so we've just adopted that here in Virginia so that everybody is consistent. Next slide. This map gives you the state of data collection across the nation, and it's important when we try to compare ourselves to other states because Virginia in the dark blue there is one of 20 states that fully reports according to the FBI's National Incident-Based Reporting System. So we capture a lot more data than the other 30 states. We, for instance, in the other states, some, if not all of their agencies will report only the most serious crime in any event. We report every crime in Virginia. So for instance, if somebody, if there's an incident that involves a rape and a homicide, that's two separate crimes, two separate violent crimes for us. And in 30 other states, it's only one. So it's important because when I show you the next slide and I show you how well Virginia is doing, we're counting more crimes and we're still doing very well. So next slide. All right, and so this is the lowest, the 15 states with the lowest crime rates across the nation. And you can see Virginia is 7th there, the 7th lowest crime rate in the nation. And again, only the states with asterisks report the full data set that we do. And that's only 2 of them that are above us on that list. So I think we can be very confident in saying that Virginia is within the top tier of lowest violent crime rates and this is 2019 data, by the way, because we have our 2020 data, and as you'll see in a minute, our violent crime rate did go slightly down this year. We don't know what it did in comparison to other states because we can't yet see their 2020 data. Next slide. All right, and this is just looking a little more closely at the violent crime rate month by month, 2019 compared to 2020 in Virginia. So this is a raw number of total violent crimes each month that you see plotted out with 2020 in red, 2019 in blue. So at the beginning, left-hand side of the graph, that downward progression in January and February is pretty typical every year. It is not typical that continues on like it did in 2020 into April, and there's every reason to believe that was a COVID-related suppression during the early and significant lockdown through the spring. As you can see, later in the year, the crime rate recovered, and for the latter part of the year, mostly exceeded the 2019 violent crime rate in Virginia. But overall, you kind of have to do the math to tease it out, but our overall violent crime rate in Virginia was actually down 2%, 2020 to 2019. So a slight downward trend, probably honestly driven mostly by that March and April suppression and May suppression in the crime rate. But either way, Virginia trends down slightly in total for the year compared to 2019. Media reports suggest that that's probably not where the major cities across the country have headed this year, but it remains to be seen comparing state by state what the other states have done on the whole, and we'll just have to wait to the fall to see. Next slide. Next slide, please. There we go. So looking at murder in particular, you see our increase here, 2018 in blue through 2020 in green. That's almost a 25% increase in our murder rate in 2020 compared to 2019. Again, murder is only one subset of the overall violent crime rate. So while I said a second ago our overall violent crime rate was down 2%, murder itself was up significantly in 2020. And I will say that pretty much matches what we're hearing nationally from those big cities that have released some preliminary data. Typically, they're seeing about a 25% increase in their homicide rate as well. So it appears that we're mostly matching the national trend there. Next slide. All right, and aggravated assault and weapons law violations, again, it's the similar trend, and you would expect that the difference between these offenses and the murder is is the death. So the underlying activity trends upward at a pretty comparable rate. Next slide. All right, forcible sex offenses. Of course, this is a component. Those rape offenses are a component of the violent crime rate, and as you can see, they went down, which is a significant driver in our violent crime rate overall going down. It's not the good news it appears to be at first blush, because while you know we don't have data per se to indicate this, but we believe strongly that what's driving that forcible sex offense rate down in part is just a lack of reporting, and in particular with regards to child sex offenses, because schools have been virtual for the majority, or were virtual for the vast majority of 2020. Those mandatory reports from schools and daycares and the like tend to be where a lot of those child sex offenses are discovered. And so the fact that that number is down this year is really as much a concern as anything. But the robbery data, on the other hand, that is genuinely, we believe, a result of people staying inside, closer to home, et cetera, during the COVID pandemic. So that may be a glimmer of good news there. Next slide. All right, larceny also down, probably for similar reasons to robbery. Just not as much opportunity in 2020. And drug offenses down. Again, this one probably has more to do with less contact with law enforcement, where the drug use was occurring in 2020. That combined with, as we'll see on the next slide, next couple of slides, decriminalization of possession of marijuana may have also brought those numbers down some. Next slide. Here we go. So marijuana, as you can see, these are drug seizures. So these are not arrests or people being charged with a drug offense. This is just the seizure of the drug itself, which obviously frequently happens in connection with a criminal arrest. But it can happen for a variety of other reasons, including just abandoned contraband property. So as you can see, marijuana is down the most significantly of all the drug types. Again, probably not surprising given decriminalization, but they're all down, with the exception of methamphetamine. They're all down somewhat through the COVID crisis, and again, probably less contact with law enforcement where drug use is occurring. Next slide. All right, so marijuana specifically, I just put this in here for general interest. You see at the beginning of the year the probably COVID-related suppression in marijuana seizures. Then there's a recovery later in the spring, and of course decriminalization didn't go into effect until July 1st. So I don't know what we're seeing there. Maybe an anticipatory drop in marijuana enforcement leading up to July 1. Really, I can't draw any conclusions for it, but as you can see, overall the numbers went down and stayed down through the remainder of 2020. Again, they're still significant numbers because it was still contraband throughout 2020, and therefore, if encountered, it would have to be seized. Next slide. All right, so hate crimes is the other big thing that has been very much in the news throughout 2020. So in Virginia, hate crime data is collected exactly the same way I mentioned with the other criminal data set. It's police reports. Obviously, there are a lot of private entities out there that collect a broader swath of hate crime data, hate incident data, not necessarily criminal data. And so they will capture things like shunning and ostracism based on race is a big one where that occurs, and also hostile speech, things that don't quite rise to a level of criminality, but are nonetheless offensive and frightening to the victims of that. So private entities can track those through a variety of methods that they have available to them, but that's not the system that we have established for, through law enforcement of reporting criminal hate crimes. What we get are actionable criminal offenses, mostly assaults and destruction of property, that sort of thing. So next slide.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Secretary, can I ask a question of Mr. Hook on the hate crimes trends?
Yes, sir, I can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, great. So I know that we're talking about trends on a yearly basis and so forth. I'm just wondering, how quickly do you hear of individual incidents? I noticed that in New York City, I've heard just incidentally through the news of some pretty horrific hate crimes against the Asian American community happening in recent days. How quickly do the local departments report up to you when there is a hate crime?
Their reports come in monthly to us.
And have we seen in the last month, or if you recall, an uptick in the Asian American community being targeted by hate crimes?
I have not looked at last month's data. The hate crimes in particular can take a couple of months for things to kind of settle, because what can happen initially is, so agencies will report their data, but they quite frequently update their data too as new facts come in. And so this happens a lot with drug offenses. When you later identify the type of drug, then you go in and backfill that data. And it can happen with hate crimes too, because the investigation at a preliminary level can either indicate it was a hate crime, and through further investigation maybe discover it wasn't, or vice versa. At first, it may not be clear, and then once you apprehend and interview the suspect, you identify that motive, and it comes in later. So I can certainly go back and check and see where the numbers stand, but I don't have any preliminary numbers from 2021.
Sure. Maybe when we do our next call, we could just get an update on that, since that seems to be a problem in some parts of the country, to see if it's made its way to Virginia, or if we're doing better than that.
Absolutely.
Good question. Deputy Talmadge, I know we met with the Asian American Advisory Board recently in light of those news reports. Senator Eben and Sean, do you have anything with respect to, I know we had some data that we shared with the Asian American Advisory Board. Do you know that off the top of your head? Or maybe we can forward it to the panel members as soon as we get our hands on it.
Yes, Mr. Secretary, I'm happy to provide a quick update. And again, we believe we're seeing an uptick in hate crimes, and we're looking at the data as we speak to really kind of validate it. However, we have found some challenges. In other words, just like many communities across the Commonwealth, there is some hesitancy to report hate crime or discrimination. So with respect to the AAPI, we're currently working to put together a package to kind of address some of the concerns, and just a couple thoughts on that. The hesitancy to report could be likely not knowing where to report it, whether it's do I call 911? Do I call the local law enforcement non-emergency number, or is it a 311 call? So we need to take a look at, is there a standardized reporting process that we should be using? There are some law enforcement agencies that are struggling with data reporting. We need to figure out why. And then the other thing we're doing with the AAPI, just like many other communities across the Commonwealth, is putting together a package of services. If you see, some training on how to report, and then more importantly, like community centers, we can provide threat assessment and security reviews for those facilities so that we can engage the community and improve the security and safety of that. So those are some things that we're working on, and we haven't finalized the coordination there. That is ongoing right now. It's very similar to some of the other faith community activities that we've done to improve awareness, reporting, and safety. So we're taking a look at that with the Asian community right now.
So, and I'll add to that as well that as my subsequent slides will show, I think you're going to see when I get into the hate crimes against Asians in Virginia, we are, for 2020 data, through most of the COVID crisis, we were not seeing an uptick within our reporting mechanism, which again is criminal incidents reported to law enforcement. And as Deputy Secretary Talmadge indicates, that there are limitations to that. Importantly, we've had contacts with the Asian Advisory Board also, and Austin White had mentioned the VFC Shield, Virginia Fusion Center Shield program, which we've also pushed to them and tried to do whatever we can to reduce those barriers to reporting. What we have learned from those contacts is that an awful lot of the increase in hate-motivated activity against Asians does appear to be things that are either not reportable to law enforcement because they're not crimes, or not getting reported to law enforcement. And certainly, whatever we can do to address those, we want to. We want to do those things. But as you can see from this slide, race is the big category right now throughout 2020, and green line is 2020. So we had a marked increase in racial bias crimes in last year, and the other categories did not really see an increase. Some went down. As you can see, they're all significantly less in terms of number of incidents. This is, by the way, a raw number of total incidents for the year each year reported to law enforcement. Next slide. So the big drivers of that in terms of the groups involved, obviously anti-Black or African-American crime is the biggest one numerically each year, and it did further increase in 2020, as did anti-white crime last year. But I'll also highlight for you, and multiple races went up very significantly as well. Anti-Asian crime, 2019 to 2020, as you can see, was ever so slightly down, but that's no real trend there. But there was certainly an absence of a trend upward in reported criminal hate crimes in Virginia in 2020. Next slide. And then just to dive a little bit more deeply into the data, principally with the two, anti-Black crime, which, as I said, is the biggest category of hate crime in Virginia. And as you can see, the offenders in those cases are, in an overwhelming majority, are white offenders. With anti-Asian crime, you do see the majority of offenders are from non-white races. Whites do make up a plurality of those offenses. Again, we're talking about a small data set in terms of reported crimes. I don't know how that would look if we had access to the same information that AAPI and others are tracking. I will say I was reviewing a report this morning from the Center for the Study of Hate and Extremism that indicates a 164% increase in anti-Asian crime in 2020 in the 16 largest cities and counties in the United States. None of those in Virginia, and our trend didn't bear that out, but certainly in the big urban centers, anti-Asian hate crime has been a major concern. And I will say that one of those was Washington, D.C. So at the very least, we know it's on our doorstep. And I suspect, as Deputy Secretary Talmadge alluded, better reporting is key to better understanding this in Virginia. And that's all I have in terms of data. I'm happy to answer any other questions.
All right, other questions for Hooker?
I actually have one. As the newbie, were there any domestic or other crimes, perhaps domestic, that have been exacerbated by COVID and people staying at home enclosed in together?
When I looked at that data in mid 2020, we don't. So from the incident-based reporting collection system, we don't capture specifically domestic assaults in that way. What we do capture through our criminal record repository is domestic violence arrests, and through April of last year, domestic violence offenses were surprisingly way down. Anecdotally, I think I've heard reports nationally that those offenses did not increase as anticipated, but I will certainly go back and pull a fresh set of data on that and share with Secretary Moran. He can circulate to the panel that information.
Thank you.
Yeah, good question. All right, we have Curtis Brown up next. We're starting to fall a little behind, but lots of good information. So State Emergency Coordinator Brown, I've already mentioned and mentioned the wonderful job you've been doing with respect to COVID, and congratulations again on taking over the Department of Emergency Management in the midst of the COVID pandemic, and we were all very proud of your accomplishments and efforts. So I hand it to you, sir.
Thank you, Secretary Moran, and to the members of the panel. A couple of brief highlights to update you on the activities of the Virginia Department of Emergency Management and the Virginia Emergency Support Team over the last couple of months. Of course, 2020 and 2021 have been historically busy years for us, and we've been able to manage that in collaboration with all of our state agency partners, many of them who are on this part of this meeting today. So I want to thank them for their service and collaboration, and the members of the Senate and the House of Delegates for your support during this recent General Assembly to provide us with additional capacity. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, we've been activated for our public health emergency since March 12th of last year, over 400 days of continuous activation. What that means is the constant coordination, collaboration, situational awareness, logistics. We have regional staff that's been working with our local government, state agency partners, with the judicial branch to pass out personal protective equipment. That was a large part of the effort over last year. We still do get requests for PPE and coordination. Right now, we're heavily involved in the vaccination effort. I know Dr. Jabari will talk about that, but this is an unprecedented response. Clearly the most deadly disaster in Virginia's history, but also the most costly and time-consuming one. Simultaneous to the public health response, we've also dealt with 10 other major disaster declarations over that period, including weather and flooding, protests, and some leading to civil unrest. We had 4 times in which we had events where we had simultaneous disaster declarations. Each time we have a specific disaster or emergency, we have to have a different state of emergency declaration. That's due to budgeting and tracking the cost. We actually had one time in July of last year, we had, for the first time ever, 3 simultaneous state of emergency declarations due to COVID, our ongoing protests and civil unrest, and also responding to Tropical Storm Isaias. And so that was, essentially a sign of the time that we're not dealing with one emergency. We can focus all our attention on that. We're dealing with simultaneous events requiring us to enhance capacity and to better coordinate in order to maintain situational awareness and also support our local governments, many of them which are very much stretched and have limited capacity. Next slide, please. On top of our responses, we still maintain the responsibility to prepare and by code to conduct exercises. And so in 2020, every year what we do prior to hurricane season, we have a VEST, Virginia Emergency Support Team Hurricane Exercise. We did that last year with the governor and the cabinet on July 27th. Before that, we brought in the agency heads who are responsible through the Commonwealth of Virginia Emergency Operation Plan with specific responsibilities for their agencies to support the VEST. And so we had a 2-day exercise to prepare for hurricane season. I'm really glad that we did that since we had an unprecedented hurricane season. The governor is a huge advocate of the VEST and the chief of staff, and making sure that all of the agencies support and ensure that everyone is responsible for their part in the Commonwealth of Virginia Emergency Operation Plan. Clearly, last year it was a different dynamic because we had COVID-19 as well as hurricane season. We had to look at what sheltering looked like in a COVID environment. FEMA changed the rules to allow us to use hotels to shelter people if we did have a major event and had to evacuate folks. We were able to use hurricanes instead of the mass vaccination centers, mass shelter centers, which would of course lead to possible spread of the virus. And at that point, of course, we didn't have the vaccine. Later in the year, in October, in preparation for getting the vaccines, we had a vaccine exercise to look at what some of the issues would be related to state and local coordination and to identify solutions to those gaps. And again, that was before the vaccine doses came to Virginia, which occurred starting in late December. This year, we've had a couple of exercises and our VOPEX exercise, a Virginia Operation Plan exercise to look at our preparedness for our 2 nuclear power plants. We just actually completed the third part of that exercise this week, working with FEMA and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to make sure that we're prepared for anything that might happen, a bad day with the nuclear power plants. We go over our communication and alert and warning protocols with our state and local officials, Department of Health, our local governments in and around our nuclear power plants participate in that. And the initial word we're hearing is that everyone did pretty well. Of course, these exercises are intended to identify gaps so we can improve and always stay ready. We also staying focused on the cyber threat and energy, working with the State Corporation Commission. We have another Virginia Emergency Support Team exercise coming up on June 9th to look at that. And so simultaneous to us responding, we're also staying ready for what might come ahead. And so this is a core part of what VDEM does, working with our state agency partners, pulling them all in to stay trained and prepared for all our various challenges. Next slide, please. And as I mentioned, the 2020 hurricane season was historically busy. the most storms on record, 30 named storms. 2005 held the previous record for with 28. Virginia was directly impacted by 7 storms. We did have damages and a couple of fatalities. Emergency declaration only for Hurricane Isaias. The 2020 outlook will be published in late 2021 of May of this month. But it's always been said it only takes one. And so we are always prepared for hurricanes in the Commonwealth. We consider this a statewide threat. We've had many occasions where these tropical storms and hurricanes have tracked far to the southwest and impacted areas all the way out to Wise County and Shenandoah Valley and Danville. And so we do a statewide preparedness effort for hurricane season and let everyone know about the threats of flooding and hurricanes and tropical storms. Next slide, please. And so as a reminder, hurricane season starts June 1st and goes all the way until November 30th. And so prior to that, we ramp up our efforts to prepare for hurricane season, which is our most deadly natural threat and one that we have to take very seriously. So we work with our Virginia Emergency Support Team to update our Commonwealth of Virginia Emergency Operation Plan and our Hurricane Annex. We've developed a hurricane playbook to very seamlessly operate within inside in order to seamlessly prepare for each step of our readiness for hurricanes. We're also improving our audio capability and technology at the Emergency Operations Center. We do have a facility that has aged very much over the last several years. I think we have one of the oldest emergency operations centers in FEMA Region 3. We do need to look at trying to enhance capabilities there. But while we have the facility, we're trying to improve what we do have in terms of technology to be able to ensure that our staff have the best capabilities possible to be able to manage a hurricane scenario. We're also looking at reorganizing the space to ensure that it's functional and is also, we're able to use it within inside our COVID environment as well. Next slide, please. Hurricane-related threats, as more of the population becomes vaccinated, people will be reverting to pre-COVID-19 practices. So we're looking at the use of congregate sheltering, but the issue of that is it could cause increases in COVID-19 cases if folks aren't vaccinated. We are still concerned about the variants and the strains. So we're again looking at the balance between congregate sheltering as well as still using the hotels, and we need to coordinate with FEMA to see the allowability on that. Staffing capability and shortages for local and state emergency congregate shelters. That is always a concern. One of the good things though right now is we're actively using our state agency partners to support our vaccination efforts at vaccine centers across the Commonwealth. And so there's a possibility to continue to leverage these staff members for our congregate shelters. And so that has been one of the benefits. Our adjunct emergency workforce personnel who have come from different state agencies have been helping with the vaccine centers. And so if we did have a large-scale hurricane, our hope is to be able to use them in support of our congregate shelters. Again, our hope is that most folks will go ahead and get vaccinated, but we understand that there will be those who do not. And so we still have to plan our hurricane preparedness within inside that scenario, that there will be the possibility of trying to limit COVID spread in a hurricane scenario. Next slide, please. Emergent threats, the Fusion Center gave a lot of this information. We are all hazards, and so we do support local governments when they do have these events, supporting, providing logistical support, situational awareness. If things escalate, it will be a state of emergency declaration. We have to track cost. And so there's a range of different threats and issues and special events that we track throughout the year that may cause us to increase our situational awareness at the Emergency Operations Center. Worst case scenario, request an emergency declaration. That is all done in coordination with our best partners, state police and others. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, I am appreciative of the General Assembly and the governor's support over the last year. The top line numbers essentially show the increase in purchasing over the last 2 years. This is directly tied to COVID-19. We've purchased a historic amount of personal protective equipment that was needed to support our schools, our local governments, to keep folks safe. As Secretary Moran mentioned, we've been focused very heavily on health equity. We had our health equity pilot project that worked with our local governments to pass out masks and hand sanitizer to our vulnerable populations, the underserved populations, going door to door. And so we've been doing a ton of work. Our finance and grants team does not get a lot of attention, but they keep us on track. And so we've been purchasing a lot of things and doing it the right way, following the FEMA guidelines, and ensuring that the state can get reimbursed for all of this, all of these things that we're doing to protect Virginians. In this recent General Assembly session, we were able to get additional support staff to continue our response and to ensure that we have the capabilities and the staffing within inside this new normal. And so this lists a couple of new staff positions that we'll have in the new fiscal year to ensure that Emergency Operations Center is ready. We have the capabilities in terms of communication and audio equipment. We have the personnel needed to, again, handle all of these multiple disasters at the same time. I have said before that our agency wasn't built historically to handle all of these simultaneous disasters, but with these additional resources, we're building the capabilities to be able to do that and deal with all the issues getting thrown to us. And so I do want to appreciate and thank you all for that support. Next slide. And as I mentioned, this year we continue to be busy. As you might recall, in February, we had a winter ice storm, a pretty significant event. I know Texas got a lot of the attention because that was happening simultaneously, but we had a significant ice storm that knocked out the electricity in many of our South Side localities for about 2 weeks. I was able to go down there. Some of these local governments have part-time or one-person emergency management office, and so they was very appreciative of the state's support. We helped them with their Emergency Operations Center. Our search and rescue teams went door to door to check on folks, let them know that there were warming and sheltering centers. Of course, a lot of folks choose not to do that, even though it's probably best, but we went door to door to check on them to make sure that nobody was in danger, and pass out food and other equipment. We have submitted this request to the White House for emergency declaration. Next slide, please. And this is just looking forward. We're going to continue to move forward with improving our emergency operation plan, building capacity, and looking for more capability at our Emergency Operations Center. And I believe that is my final slide.
Curtis, great. And nice job taking the opportunity to thank the legislators as they saw the you have been provided some additional resources, and we do appreciate that. And your finance team has been working overtime and will continue to, because obviously the spending on the crisis will continue for a long time as expenses get tabulated and forwarded to you all for reimbursement. We do give a shout out to FEMA as well. You've developed a wonderful relationship with the Federal Emergency Management Agency, and they've been providing 100% reimbursement, which is new, which is welcomed as well. So quick question. I see our time is starting to run. We still have a wonderful presentation by Bob Muskoff. We've been working very closely with Secretary Carey and Commissioner Oliver with VDH. And so I do want to give him time, but any questions of Director Brown? Good report. You answered all their questions, Curtis. But anybody, we would welcome you if next time anyone from the panel that's in Richmond, if you want to come by the EOC and visit it just to see what it looks like, and a lot of activity there, I encourage you to do so. So with that, I'll hand it over to Bob Muskoff. Colonel Muskoff, you on the line?
It'll be Dr. Jabari, Secretary.
Oh, okay, great.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Secretary. Good morning to all members of the panel. Good to see you.
Enjoyed working with you. And you know all about those hurricanes. Jabari comes to us from Louisiana and gained a great deal of experience down there, and he's been a wonderful asset to us. So, Param, nice to see you. Thank you. All yours.
Good to see you too, sir. Thank you. It's really been a pleasure to work with you, our entire unified command structure. And as I sit here through the last couple hours, just a reminder of the wide depth and breadth of activities that our partners, all of you in the emergency response sector, and specifically law enforcement safety, have to think about. So while public health has been laser focused on COVID-19, we realize that there's many other types of threats. And just a quick shout out back to all of you and State Coordinator Brown and everyone at VDEM for their incredible support over the course of the last year. We ended on the budget slide. Those are the kinds of things that are just so critical for any sort of a response, right? You have to have the money, you have to have the capability, you have to have the planning expertise. And as I'll go through some of my slides of the VEST structure, the JIC. So the ability of VDEM to work through the Virginia Emergency Support Team to give us that structure, the VEST, the Virginia Emergency Support Team, has been critical for us to carry out our successful campaign. So the title of today's presentation is the COVID vaccination response. If you all recall, in October, we provided a COVID response. We focused on testing, contact tracing, and many of our goals and objectives. Today's focus is vaccination, but we have a number of other objectives that we have not forgotten about, including medical surgeon therapeutics. Fortunately, as you all know, we had a fairly sharp rise in cases in the late fall, and they have precipitously dropped since then. But there's still measures that we can provide, specifically clinical measures. You may have heard of the monoclonal antibodies or the Regeneron. As these new therapies come forth, we want to make sure our providers know about them and to refer them. Community mitigation has to do with a lot of the executive orders and the enforcements, the social distancing out in the community, the wearing of masks. And as you all know, we're looking to relax some of those standards. And testing, while again, the cases have dropped, and that's a great news, what we really want to do is ensure the testing along with the contact tracing is done in a very timely manner, so we can, in fact, contain the illness, contain those who are sick, especially those that may not know it because they're asymptomatic. And so encourage to continue testing, even though our cases drop, so we can really limit the spread. But of course, today's focus is mostly going to be about vaccinations and the partnership we've had with the VEST in our efforts. Next slide. In our continuing flexing up and down, as ICS is intended to be, to scale up and scale down. Once the vaccinations became available, we really needed, again, to reinstitute the VEST and the unified command in a slightly different shape and structure than when we first started this response. So we came back together, obviously under the direction of the governor, the cabinet, who had great influence and foresight on the policy group and would attend our emergency management meetings under the direction of State Coordinator Brown and Dr. Oliver. What you see in those blue boxes is a name of a VDEM lead and a VDH lead, because while this was generally a public health emergency response, we realized it really needed to be coordinated in tandem with our emergency response partners. So we brought really the best of of skills of all agencies forth, but leading again in a bipartisan kind of effort here between the VDH and VDEM partners, looking at planning, operations, logistics, and finance. And so testing has been the critical focus where we've really had to partner with our local emergency planners within the cities and our counties to really make a lot of what has happened over the last few months possible. But again, I want to remind folks we have not forgotten about the other critical aspects of testing, of providing care to our long-term care facilities. Fortunately, we've seen morbidity and mortality drop significantly since we've been able to successfully vaccinate, but we're keeping an eye, especially with the continued threat and risks of variants. So we have this structure. We may wind up downsizing as we get into the hurricane season, but again, the critical support when it comes from VDEM Invest with regards to planning, the joint information, emergency procurement, those are the things that will probably continue even though we may reduce the size and complexity of the current structure. Next slide. This is our one-page dashboard. The number of cases in Virginia, just a little over 663,000 fatalities, unfortunately over 10,800. And to give you perspective, I was looking at the minutes the last time we met in October, where we had 184,000 cases and 3,636 deaths. So we've seen both of those numbers increase by 3 to 4-fold, again, with our major peak occurring between November and February. We are seeing our hospitals really at a good place in terms of capabilities, ICU, surge, and the PCR positivity rate. That's good news too. Our goal was to get it under 5%. When you have a high positivity rate, it means that a lot of individuals you're testing are positive. So that could be indicative of a ongoing outbreak, spreading of the illness, but it could also mean that we're not testing enough. And we're just testing the ones who are showing up sick. And so given the fact that with this illness, as opposed to a lot of the other prior pandemic plannings that we've done, a lot of individuals are asymptomatic. It's really important to continue to have that testing infrastructure in the community, which we'll reference in just a second. So we really have a pulse on our case prevalence. So good news overall, the cases are trending down, the positivity rates are trending down, and our hospital surge capacity remains more than abundant. Looking over to the right side, the vaccine demographics, and really a lot to celebrate here. I was present at the FEMA website, vaccination site last week here with Jim Reddick, who's on the panel here from our local emergency management office, as well as, of course, Secretary Moran, the governor, Dr. Underwood, and really, as State Coordinator Brown has mentioned, our entire focus through this response has been to ensure we have an equitable response, whether it comes to testing, vaccinations, or other therapeutics. And to look at these vaccination rates, the light blue numbers gives you the absolute counts. The dark blue numbers takes the population of Blacks, Latinos, and others and gives you a rate. So you see that those numbers are more evened out. And so to see that, yes, we still have some more work to do to make sure that all members of our population have equal access to vaccinations. Compared to many other states, we are doing a tremendous job in ensuring equity across our services. The very bottom is representation of the age ranges. Not surprisingly, if you all remember, we went through a very defined prioritization of vaccinating healthcare providers, first responders, those above 65 with specific health conditions, and we're continuing to expand that throughout all those individuals who are eligible for a vaccine. So for Pfizer currently, it's 16 and above, and as some of you may have heard, we're looking at a potential FDA approval to bring that down all the way to age 12. So we'll begin to see younger individuals being vaccinated, and the key factor there is that while the younger individuals don't necessarily wind up in the hospital as often or necessarily having the higher complications, they're the ones who are often spreading the illness. So as we vaccinate everyone else, as we get herd immunity in the older populations, it's really critical we also get to our school-age children, which will mean we can safely open up our schools in the fall. So more to come on the vaccination efforts, but really great strides made as, again, we have over half of Virginians who've gotten a first dose and over a third who are fully inoculated. Next slide. This is just a quick graphic where you see the number of individuals vaccinated. We started trending upwards. We started opening up these large community vaccination sites in late February and early March. We had a lot of interest, and we're beginning to see in the last week or two that we're actually not filling up the sites, very much consistent with what we're seeing nationally. And the good news in a way is our supply now out meets demand. And so we have vaccinations available through public health, through mass vaccination sites, at our pharmacies. There are still pockets of need in various parts of the community. But what this means is also is we're changing our guidelines. We're being a lot less stringent. We're allowing walk-ins, in fact, encouraging it. We're allowing individuals, if they've gotten a first dose at one site, they don't have to come back to that same location to get the second dose. So we're trying to offer as much flexibility, make it as easy as possible for individuals to get vaccinated to keep our numbers up. But we're beginning to see a slight curve downward with regards to interest and perhaps number of vaccination events needed in the community. And one of the things we're going to be doing is, we'll mention potentially on the next slide, is doing more targeted outreach within schools, within churches. A lot of individuals are still hesitant to come to large government-run vaccination sites. And so that is exactly one of the things that FEMA's really been tremendous in helping us with. The National Guard, phenomenal support from them from the beginning, but creating strike teams to go out into the community with our local health departments to vaccinate individuals, to meet individuals where they're at. So our efforts will continue through the next month in the summer, but probably pulling away from setting up these very large community sites and being more laser focused in specific communities of need. Next slide. A quick point on testing, really just to highlight the fact that we still have our eyes on this, trying to help our areas, our communities where there's a higher rate of vulnerable populations. We've built great partnerships with our private sector. Walgreens early on came on when HHS and the feds released those quick antigen tests, those rapid tests. We partnered with them, we provided it to them and said, hey, we'll pay you $30 as opposed to $100, $125 for some of the other sorts of tests. It's a quick test. And try to make it as accessible as possible. We started with a pilot of 15, worked really well. We expanded to 25, now 54. And so continue to increase community sites. We're actually working with Dollar General right now. You all may have heard about incentivization to try to really encourage people to go get tested, and not talking about vaccinations, right? Can we give them a free meal, a free donut, a free pizza, but something to keep encouraging individuals to get tested and vaccinated. So we're exploring new opportunities with Dollar General and the CDC, and those efforts will start within a few weeks, pushing it back a little bit from May 10th to see if that is a way of encouraging compliance with vaccination and testing. Next slide. The public health response community mitigation measures, again, the governor has talked about how he's going to look to loosen these. Our pandemic metrics look good. Our cases are going down. Our percent positivity is going down. So we'll continue to increase the number of individuals that can gather indoors, outdoors. A lot of this was very helpful, I think, in graduation planning, and we'll continue to see a loosening of restrictions. Mask requirements, I think, as we get more and more individuals vaccinated, of course, that's less of a chance of spreading the illness. The public health community recognizes those who are vaccinated and still asked to wear a mask. That's really out of an abundance of caution. But again, given the variants, given the fact we haven't quite reached herd immunity, our current executive order still asks for all individuals 5 or older to cover their mouth and nose if in an indoor setting or if they're not able to socially distance outdoors. Next slide. Vaccine allocation, this is just talking about what we're getting through the state, through our federal retail pharmacy. They've been phenomenal in getting into some of our long-term care facilities, and currently, again, where individuals can go on a website and identify pharmacies within their geographic region and sign up for a vaccine. Really trying to partner with everybody. We had the hospitals early on for their cold chain management. We have public health throughout, retail pharmacies, private docs coming online. As COVID becomes kind of like the next flu, right? As it becomes endemic in our communities. And, you know, my guess is like all other coronaviruses, we're going to see that spike again late fall next year. As we saw with H1N1, it started in April, but then we saw it really peak again in the fall. You know, viruses have their own rhythm of when they're going to increase and come down. So it's going to be really important as we think about our response, where we pull away from responding to COVID as an emergency, but really one thing we have to just deal with going forth in our communities to get our private docs up, educated, get them the vaccines, and get them connected to serving the patients once again. So we'll go on to the next slide. We've talked about these CVCs, the community vaccination sites, these large areas, and then now really shifting to mobile capability. So we had 9 fixed sites operational, providing over 16,000 doses a day. We strategically located each of these sites where there were specific areas of need, where the vaccination rates weren't quite as high as we'd expected. So really providing federal and state support to areas across Virginia. And then now shifting that to doing more mobile, more smaller, and more flexible vaccination offerings within the community. Next slide. I mentioned the pharmacy partnership, and of course, they've been, again, instrumental in testing and looking at therapeutics. Can't say enough about the value there. Next slide. The call center, this was another thing that was stood up fairly quickly. We realized as individuals were trying to get registered, and again, realized the initial registration systems that were put together by the CDC. Then we had certain ones here in Virginia that we were trying to kind of put together. And as many of you know, we had some challenges with regards to the registration system. There were different modules, different ways of doing it. And we realized we really need that opportunity for citizens to be able to call and talk to someone if they don't have a computer, if they don't have internet, if they have questions. And so the call center was stood up, over 710,000 incoming calls and 230,000 outgoing. I mean, that is incredible volume. And this was a tremendous work that was done in collaboration with VDOT. Is that right, Secretary Moran? The call center was with VDOT and our Deloitte partners. And so really bringing the whole government approach to providing services. Really important for us, making sure we have different translators, Spanish, Korean, Arabic, Mandarin, and a number of others, and also providing American Sign Language. We realize as we go through the next couple of quick slides, our outreach needs to target everyone and make sure it's equitable. So we really invested a lot of resources to make sure our community outreach, as well as the resources of the public, involves all of those that have access and functional needs, disabilities, or non-English speaking residents. Next slide. We've talked about striving for equity in COVID-19 response, and I'll defer to Curtis Brown at the end of this to just kind of put his light on this. This has been a huge collaboration with the Health Equity Working Group under Dr. Underwood and a number of others, Sable Nelson with the Health Department, Deputy Secretary DeSager, just phenomenal partnership to make sure that our response applies a health equity lens to all aspects. And we really think about the social, economic, and historical barriers to achieving good health. And again, tremendous strides made here in Virginia. Next slide. We've talked about access and functional needs. I have to give a shout out to Ms. Karen Brim, who has been a critical part of and a lead for the Unified Command, connecting as well, again, with our local agencies to ensure those that have specific disabilities, and again, the access and functional needs, to make sure that they are, their voices are heard. You know, we first started out with drive-through testing. A lot of folks said, well, what do I do if I don't have a car? We partnered with Walgreens. An individual said, well, can I go talk to somebody? If I have a wheelchair, can they accommodate me and be able to take care of me? When we talk about vaccinations, really thinking about these large vaccination sites, how are they, how do we ensure accessibility to all populations? So a lot of time and effort going into ensuring that our populations with access and functional needs, their needs have been met as well. Next slide. Communications, I think one of the most valuable pieces is we got the best back together was to have a joint information center with so many calls, thousands of residents, and of course, trying to ensure we are responsive to constituent concerns, residents, local legislators, businesses, academia. We have everybody who's impacted by COVID-19, and it's just been a phenomenal partnership through the governor's office, Craig Pfeiffer most recently, and a number of other individuals, Maria Ruppis, who's our communications director, in partnership with VDEM, to ensure that we have a responsive joint information center and be able to provide obviously the information through governor's press conferences, through local press conferences, sharing of the talking points, and ensuring all of our stakeholders are informed. Next slide. Can't thank VDOM enough for logistics, even though we had a little bit of a lull last summer and in the fall. We were throughout the response relying on VDOM to assist us with the sending out of those, again, tests, the PPEs, personal protective equipment, and really being that backdrop support for all of the local emergency officials throughout the state. So, Curtis talked about the admin, the finance role. There's a lot of people at the back of the shop making all things happen, right? So the flop, you've got the operations, those are the people doing the work, but there's a lot of people doing the planning and the FL, the finance and the logistics that happens. And again, there's no way that public health would have been successful to the point that it has been without the tremendous support, leadership, direction of our partners at the best. So this is just some of the examples of how the logistics team have helped support the vaccination sites, our testing and other events as just noted. Next slide. Funding awards and expenditures, this one of the nice things is once we got the cash flowing, there were some questions, concerns early on in the response of who's getting what, how is it coming, is that we have been able to really think about immediate response and also starting to think about how do we invest these high dollars so that we are a better and more prepared community, a more resilient community. So it's been really nice to see from the feds the greater amount of flexibility in using the various funds, whether we're talking about the CDC ELC funds or the CARES money coming down. It has been tremendous, and it has really helped us on the local level to be able to plan and respond to the needs of the community. One of the key things I think we all realize is you can't just throw money at a problem. You have to have the infrastructure. Curtis mentioned how in some of our localities, we may have a part-time emergency planner. I experienced that when I was in Louisiana and here as well as a local health director. We really have to invest in our infrastructure, both public health and emergency management, to be able to respond effectively. So without that infrastructure, all the money in the world is not going to be utilized as effectively as it can. We don't necessarily respond as quickly as we can. And so I think one of the lessons learned is we just have to reinvest in our public health and our emergency management once again. And the final lessons learned, I think we've touched on a few of these, is we have to be prepared for multiple types of disasters. Consistent processes are necessary. Some of us have moved away from our ICS training. There are other sorts of things that are constantly going on with our exercises. As State Coordinator Brown just mentioned, we just had one around this week around a radiological exercise. So we're constantly doing this work, but it's really important to ensure we have community engagement throughout. And I think State Coordinator Brown's talked about the facility space, as well as just the usual complexities. VDM has 7 regions, VDH has 5. Our localities don't necessarily match up. We see this through a lot of efforts. It's sometimes challenging to connect all the levels of government from state, regional to local. But again, I think through our experience, through our shared learning, we have done a very strong job of that. But certainly, I think certain administrative planning and coordination can probably be improved through, again, a little bit more investment into the infrastructure. That concludes my presentation. Thank you again all for your time. I appreciate your patience as we went a few minutes over time.
No, Dr. Barry,
Mr.
thank
Secretary?
you condensed a 2-hour presentation into 20 minutes, so I congratulate you. Senator Evan.
I have 3 questions, if I might. First, I want to thank you, Mr. Jabari, for all your work on the vaccinations, especially on the flexibility and creativity. But I was wondering, on the dashboard, it showed about 663,000 reported cases that have occurred in Virginia. And I was wondering, do we do any kind of estimates as to how many people currently have COVID in Virginia?
If you go onto the dashboard, the epidemic curve shows by day how many cases are diagnosed each day. So on that same dashboard, you run the vaccines. There's also a summary and a cases. If you go on, you'll see the day-by-day number of cases that we have formally diagnosed. And again, that number fortunately is coming down, and we've been under 1,000 cases for several days in a row now, which portends a good short-term future for us at least.
So then there's no official estimate, but I could assume that if there's only 1,000 cases diagnosed a day, that maybe there's only 10,000 active cases, or?
The rule we've generally used is you could have up to 30 to 40% asymptomatic. There may be some folks out there who have symptoms and don't get tested. So clearly the ones that test is what we know officially and which goes on our case record. So I'm not sure if I would apply a tenfold factor to that. We don't really have good data to say of what would be the true number, but that's the official record for the state. So the Virginia dashboard would provide that information.
Okay, and if I could follow up with two other questions. One is, I had constituents writing to me asking both pro and con about school personnel being mandated to have vaccines. Do we know, is there anywhere in Virginia that school personnel are mandated to have the vaccine as a condition of their employment?
Are we talking K through 12 or
Yeah.
certainly not higher ed? So I think in higher ed, a few places are looking at that. That is actually a question that we were just having with our Office of Attorney General, looking at that, about whether that would be that could be legally permissible, and I believe it is. Whether schools have actually adopted that or will do uniformly, I think those are conversations still to be had. I think many from the public health side would argue there's great benefit to encouraging that, but we haven't yet made any formal decisions. That'll be something discussed at the policy level with Secretary Moran, Secretary Kerry, and the governor's office in the very near future.
Thank you. And my final question, looking ahead, is when do we think people will need to be revaccinated? If someone was vaccinated in January or February or whenever, do we assume that the vaccine only lasts for a year and that there'll be a new vaccine, perhaps take into account other variants?
Yeah, you raised a very good question. I think you may have heard Moderna and a few others saying they're already trying to plan for a next vaccine, whether you call it a booster or new. You know, my understanding is what I think is going to happen, very much like the flu. This is a virus. It mutates, it changes, and it all depends on how much it changes, right? If it changes a little bit, the vaccine that we have would be very effective. If it changes moderately, the vaccine's a little less effective. If it changes a lot, then we may need a brand new vaccine. So the long-term studies obviously haven't yet been done. The bottom line is any vaccine now will help prevent, not prevent infection perhaps completely, but will be very helpful in future strains as well, right? So vaccines recognize parts of the virus and help you create antibodies. And so if those antibodies are in you, even if they may not be a perfect match for the next strains, they're going to confer some immunity to future strains. So I think the going thought is, let's make sure everyone is vaccinated currently, and we'll look to see how our scientists and the FDA will come out with new recommendations for potentially future vaccines, whether they'll become yearly like the seasonal flu, or whether we'll confer some immunity more long term. This is really new. I mean, we have, again, a lot of experience with influenza viruses, but a coronavirus at this level we haven't seen for generations.
Thank you.
Yes, go ahead.
Two quick questions for Dr. Jabari. Number one, do we know what Virginia's R0 is and how it compares to other states? And the other question is, as we start moving from large vaccination sites into more decentralized and trying to get the vaccine into physicians' offices, what is the plan to deal with the cold chain issues, especially in rural areas where there are not very many of the high capacity freezers that the Pfizer vaccine particularly requires?
Sure. And would you mind repeating the first question as well? I heard the question about the cold chain. What was the first question?
What's our R0 and how does it compare to other states? Do we have good public health data that's recent enough to answer that?
My apologies. I'm missing your critical word of
R0, the number of people that an infected person is.
Oh, R0. Oh, I am apologize. Okay, sure. So the R0, so the magic number there that we were trying to get under is 1. So for those on the call, for every 1 individual who becomes infected, the R0 tells you whether it's spread to 2 others, 4 others. So without any mitigation efforts, that was an exponential increase. But as we see vaccinations, social distancing, our masking, the R0 has continued to climb down. So it's clearly well below 1. I haven't looked at the most recent one, but what we're beginning to see, and for some reason, Virginia, even compared to some of its neighboring states, West Virginia, Kentucky, we had a slightly different shape to our epidemic curve. We had our rise in cases a little bit later and our drop in cases a little bit later. So our epidemic curve had shifted just a little bit. What we're seeing, obviously, uniformly across this region and the Mid-Atlantic is the R0 is less than 1. So we're beginning to see a decline in the number of cases. I'm sorry, I don't have the most recent value. With regards to your question of cold chain management, you raised a really good question. Certainly, that's one of the reasons why when we got the Pfizer, we really had to rely on our hospital systems to help support the logistics. When we do our community efforts, I'm currently in Norfolk and Virginia Beach as acting health director, and we've had to rely on those hospitals to help support some of our storage of our vaccines. When we're talking about the physicians and their offices, that may become a particular barrier. So some have invested in some in the ability to have those -70-degree freezers, but I also think just out of practicality, the Moderna or the Johnson & Johnson may be a better suited vaccine for those areas. So again, the partnership there, these hospitals have really come to the community's help and assistance. There are grant funds if physician communities or others would like to access to purchase those. And we'll be working again step by step, but likely encouraging some of the other options as opposed to the Pfizer vaccine for their use as well.
Mr. Newmark, I do, the National Capital Region gives me that number each morning, and today it was 0.84. For Northern Virginia, it was a 0.8. District of Columbia was 0.86, and then Maryland, the area around the nation's capital, was a 0.88. So we're very pleased. 0.8, as Dr. Jabari has described, that's a very desirable number. For at least for Northern Virginia, we have that statistic daily.
Hey, Parm, this is Bob. Can I just chime in a little bit on
Sure, please.
Yeah, on the distribution to the primary care providers? We're working with pharmacies to break down the size of the lots and as well assist in the cold chain management. And they've been very cooperative. And as we go forward with more PCPs, we'll be using them much more.
Thank you. And that was Bob Moskoff, our Director of Emergency Preparedness for VDH.
Tell you what, I know the time is over, but this is obviously very important. We also, Dr. Jabari, I know you would encourage all the panel members to put this data up on their social media feeds. I know these legislators send out a lot of email communications. They've been doing a great job hosting town hall meetings, but as part of our messaging and our communications initiative, we really need to get that next 10 to 15% vaccinated, and we're all going to have to make that effort. Is that not true?
Yes, sir. We're asked on the local level from our faith-based organizations, our city leaders, what is the latest and greatest. And I think the bottom line, and this speaks to variants for the future, this speaks to how best we can put this pandemic behind us, is just really encourage the vaccinations. What happened with the J&J, the 6 out of a million, unfortunately had some unintended consequences where we saw clearly after that a decline in interest of Virginians wanting to be vaccinated. We're talking about 6 in a million. That should give individuals confidence that if we have rare side effects, we can pick those up. And so, the bottom line, vaccines are extremely safe. They prevent you from getting illness. We gotta do all that we can, public, private sector, coming together to overcome vaccine hesitancy. We've talked about we may not be able to reach what's called herd immunity. That is the ideal number we want to have, so we prevent the propagation of illness and bring the R0 down to 0. But let's try to manage this. And right now, we know that vaccinations are free. If people are charged, they're just charged for the administration fee, but the individual doesn't pay for them. They're accessible, and please help us, as Secretary Moran just mentioned, advocate for individuals to go get the vaccine whenever possible.
Thank you. Hey, Sean, we're way well over. I know if somebody has a question for Dr. Jabari, use his email address. You could reach out to us as well, and we'll share this document. Param, I think your email is param.jabari@virginia.gov. .virginia.gov. Good. All right. So, Sean,
yes, sir.
I want to allow time for public comments. So why don't you bring it home?
Yeah, happy to do that, sir. And also, UVA reported a statewide R0 yesterday, 0.87. So that's statewide. It's just below 0.9. So, ladies and gentlemen, we do have some members of the public in the meeting room, and for WebEx, if you're on the phone, excuse me, if you're participating in the meeting and would like to speak, if you just put a comment in the chat box and I will unmute your line, and I'll just pause for a couple seconds. Any member of the public, please indicate your desire to make comment in the chat box. All right, Mr. Secretary, we do not have public comment for our next meeting, though. That we have not scheduled a specific date, and we are trying to plan a face-to-face. So we're going to navigate some of the updated COVID public health precautions and see if we can conduct that safely and appropriately. So more to follow on that in the near future. And Mr. Secretary, back to you.
I'll let you handle that. Just two quick things. One, thank you. This was terrific participation today. So we might consider in person, but then also maybe allow some folks to join, because this was terrific participation. Really appreciate it. A lot of topics. The second point I'd make is a lot of topics today we tried to cover. Obviously a lot going on, but if any individual member desires a particular brief on an issue, would welcome your suggestions. So, communicate with myself or Secretary Sean Talmadge. So I'll just make those two quick points, Sean, and then hand it back to you to close us out.
No, sir. That is the meeting. If you desire to close the meeting, it's all you, sir.
Senator Evan makes the motion to adjourn, seconded by Chris Cruz. His name is next. Do I hear it? All in favor, say aye.
Aye. Aye.
All opposed, hearing none. Hey, thank you. Again, very good meeting. Appreciate you all participation. Thank you.